Now let's talk about definitely a serious issue. Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, has achieved a legal triumph today. He cannot be extradited to the United States, according to a London court. The judge blocked the request because of concerns over Mr. Assange's mental health and the risk of suicide in the US. He is wanted in the States over his publication of thousands of classified documents in 2010, 2011. We know he spent years in the Ecuadorian embassy, hiding from charges that he could be arrested right away here for, and charges in Sweden which have now been dropped. So was this the right decision? I'm concerned to hear that the reason for him not being extradited was because of his mental health and a possibility of suicide. I'd rather hoped it might have been something to do with freedom of speech. Let's talk to the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. Good afternoon, Alan.
Hello, Kevin.
What's your feeling about this? I mean, I sort of never thought he should be extradited because this is an issue. I'm a journalist. I don't like secrets, and I don't actually mind people who find secrets that nations do not want published and they publish them. I accept that in very rare cases there are examples when a state should keep very serious secrets from its citizens, but in most cases, states and nations that seek to act secretively are not successful states, are not the kind of places we want to live in. So I would have hoped there would have been another reason for Julian Assange not being extradited to America, rather than the fact that he's suffering mental health issues and may commit suicide.
Well, I'd agree with you. And the issue here is one of why was he being extradited? You talk about the freedom of speech issue. What he's actually being extradited over is about claims that he aided and abetted hacking, theft, disclosure of the identities of informants, some of whom later we believe lost their lives. It's slightly different to just freedom of speech because, as you well know, as a journalist, you're not allowed to break the law in doing your freedom of speech exposures in this sort of way. So the question really is, are we allowing someone to get off breaking the law on freedom of speech grounds? And are we now covering it with a mental health excuse, which surely applies to every single person facing extradition? I mean, I wouldn't want to be extradited to the US if I was facing a crime. I've now got a perfect excuse, don't I, to go and say, I fear for my life, I'm going to commit suicide, and I won't end up in the US. Surely that's, when it comes to fellow democracies, isn't it the case that justice needs to do its cause? It may well be that if he's tried, he'll be found innocent. Surely the correct course of action is to allow justice to take its course and go from there. This man claims to be a great advocate for democracy and protecting our societies, yet he's laughed for years at the legal systems that underpin that democracy. And I fear that today's sort of ruling will only add to that sort of mockery.
But just because we have an extradition deal with America doesn't mean to say that we have to extradite everyone that they request. And I would suggest that Julian Assange might have been a case where we as a sovereign state said, well, we can deal with this guy, thank you very much. And we're not convinced that your reasons for casting him as some sort of super spy, breaker of international rules is a valid one. I just think there is a case here for saying to America, sorry, you're a friend of ours, but not in this case, you're not having him.
Well, again, it goes to what you believe is acceptable conduct or not. Do you think it's right to hack computers? Do you think it's right to conspire with others to steal information? Do you believe that informants should have their identities exposed? If you do, fine, you might well fall in that category. Yeah. My view is let the courts run their case. If maybe there's a case for having a trial here, that's another matter. I think what's interesting about this particular case is that the judge said there clearly is a case for him to answer in the US, and we're just not doing it because of the mental health grounds. So I do share your concern at the latter issue, but I think we have to face facts that the judge herself did say there is a case to be answered as well.
It wasn't only American secrets that Julian Assange leaked, there were British secrets as well. Why don't we prosecute him?
Well, there may well be a case for doing so now. If we're saying that he can't go to the US, it may well be a case for us to look at and do that. The reason, of course, why we haven't gone for the hacking issue and all that is because, of course, that occurred in the US. So it's only right and proper. The Americans get first dibs, if you like, since the crime occurred on their soil and in their jurisdiction. So, again, it does depend on that. If we're now saying we're never going to allow him to go to the US, there may well be a case for us to try him ourselves. But it is, a jurisdictional issue to start with.
Yeah, I must admit, Henry, Alan, sorry, I was thinking of Henry Jackson there. Where is Henry? No, I must admit, Alan, you've certainly got me thinking about it. You could be, I'm slightly turned on my view of it, but I just sort of balk at the idea of foreign powers telling us, give us this person, and if it's America, we just tend to do it. So in some respects, I'm glad that we haven't, but I don't like the reason. Do you have any information on the state of Julian Assange out of interest? Because it does sound as if we are now in territory where compassion is called for if this guy really is going downhill mentally, and you can understand why. Poor bloke spent, 4 or 5 years stuck in a single room in the Ecuadorian embassy, now straight into Belmarsh. Life has not been fun for him for quite a while.
Look, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't possibly assess his condition. We have to obviously take whatever medical, reports were provided very seriously. But what I will say to that, it's worth remembering why he went into hiding in the first place. He went into hiding to escape not merely the US potential, but really the Swedish potential, which were rape allegations, which are now, of course, time limited and out of existence. He went to ground because he didn't want to be extradited to Sweden to face allegations of rape. Now, I'm sure all of us listening, don't take that too kindly as to thinking that someone is able to avoid justice simply because they time out the allegation. And again, while I have, obviously sympathy for anyone who may have a mental health issue, it could have been avoided had he gone to face trial in Sweden. And again, he protested his innocence, said it wasn't true, etc., etc. Well, why don't you face justice then? Why allow the allegation to run itself out in that way? And again, I fear that, we may end up with him running out all allegations at all times, simply using this excuse.
Yeah, so using this excuse, your viewpoint is clearly that we should extradite Julian Assange to America, where he can face charges, legitimate charges, that he broke the law and revealed state secrets, not only of America, but Britain and countries all over the world. So your standpoint is that. But if the courts here continue to accept that he's a suicide risk and that he suffers now serious mental health issues, there'll be no extraditing of that man to America, will there?
No, there isn't. And again, I'm not going to critique the courts. If they feel in their, sort of process that is the answer that they feel is appropriate, I'm a layman. It's not for me to critique that. Let lawyers do that. Let scientists, let sort of doctors look at that in that sort of way. What I do think, though, is something all of us should be concerned about as a principle of natural justice. If it is believed, as a judge in this case, believe that there is a case to be answered, or at least spoken about, and we're not going to do that, how does justice get served? It's one thing, I quite agree, if you say there is no case here, we believe there's no case, but that's not what we have said in the courts here. We've said there is one, and under any other circumstances, he would have been extradited. It's just as a health issue. So how do you square that circle? That is a question the legal system will have to come up with an answer for, or else someone has essentially escaped justice.
Last question, really, Alan. I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, but do you think that people like you and I have a reason to objectively feel slightly suspicious about this excuse that has been so successful in preventing the extradition of Julian Assange to America?
Well, look, Assange has tried all sorts of tactics over time to avoid extradition to various jurisdictions. We went to ground, as we know, for a number of years in the Ecuadorian embassy to avoid going to Sweden and potentially the US as well. Now we've had all sorts of things coming up here. Again, it's not for me to question the medical sort of opinion that's come up here. It'll be interesting to see if he was independently examined by others to see to investigate what they thought about this as well, and that sort of end result. My fear, though, is that if this does stand as a general principle, then you could see extraditions of all kinds stopping if people are able to show their immense grief about being extradited. Again, I've no doubt there is genuine fear on the part of Mr. Assange about facing trial in the US. But you'd have to question as to whether that fear is driven by legitimate, issues in terms of being framed, or whether he feels that he's actually going to be found guilty because he is guilty. And that is a question that only he can answer, and only medical sources can find a conclusion for.
Well, Alan, at the beginning of this conversation, I was pretty certain where I stood on the issue, and now I'm not. So you have successfully put a load of doubts into my mind. Fascinating conversation, though. Thank you so much, Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, on the fate of Julian Assange, who, as of now, will not be extradited to America to face justice over there, because we're not going to let him. Apparently, he has mental health issues and maybe a suicide risk. So watch this space. I don't think we've heard the end of that story.